Hi, everybody. Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA podcast. I'm Gabrielle Carteris, president of SAG-AFTRA.
And I'm David White, National Executive Director of SAG-AFTRA.
Today, we are going to be talking about the alarming attack on the free press and the very real threat to their First Amendment rights. Nina Totenberg and Eric Spillman join us to talk to us about what's going on inside and outside the newsroom.
Nina is a journalist who needs no introduction. She's an award-winning legal affairs correspondent for NPR. Her reports air regularly on All Things Considered, Morning Edition, and Weekend Edition, among others. Her coverage of the Supreme Court and legal affairs has won her widespread recognition and really devotion nationwide and beyond. And she joins us from NPR studios in Washington.
Hello?
Nina, you laugh, but I've been listening to you since the 80s, since I became politically conscious. So
Don't go there.
And let me just introduce Eric. Let me introduce Eric. He's an Emmy Award-winning reporter for the KTLA Morning News in Los Angeles. He's worked with SAG-AFTRA on contract negotiations. We were just discussing that during the attempted acquisition of his parent company, Tribune Media, by Sinclair Broadcasting Group. He has also been covering the devastating fires here in California. Thank you for all the work you do, Eric, really, because you help to inform us.
Well, thankfully today I don't smell like smoke from the fire, so that since we're all in the same room, that's something to be grateful for.
I think it might be helpful for us to anchor the conversation in what is entailed in being a broadcast journalist, period. I mean, when you think about it today, how would you describe your job?
One of the things that changed a lot is, the advent of social media. So now it seems like it's more of a two-way street where if you make an error in a report, you're going to know about it right away from somebody. And also people have suggestions that sometimes are useful. You might be on the scene of some kind of a breaking story and you're going to find out from viewers who are tweeting you information that's useful in putting together a story. So that's been a huge change over the last few years. Also, technology has made our jobs easier in many senses. The ability to go places and to be able to get a broadcast signal. Now we use devices that tie up cell phones, various cell sites, and you can get a signal out from just about anywhere, whereas before you were having to roll a truck somewhere and rely on getting a signal to a mountaintop. Now, really, you're not limited by cables. You're not tethered to a news van anymore, and that's a huge step forward.
Are you feeling tethered, though, when you talk about social media? We have in SAG-AFTRA, the BSC, which is the Broadcast Steering Committee, and they talk about sometimes feeling tethered to social media. So you're talking about people giving you ideas, but also the requirement that you have to fill.
Well, I think you want to keep at the forefront what your goal is, which is you need to be a reporter. And so things that help you to do that and to write your story or to put it together are things that you need to focus on. And you don't want to get sidetracked with the other stuff.
Nina, is that similar for you, or are you working on longer baking type stories and therefore don't have the same pressure to be up to speed all the time through social media and engaging with an audience in that manner?
Well, I'm often on deadline and crashing, as my husband has learned over the years. He says when we were recording, he would call me up and I'd say, "I'm on a deadline, goodbye." And that continues to this day. But I confess that maybe it's a function of my age in part, and also a function of my beat. I don't check social media morning, noon, and night. I post things on Twitter because it's good for marketing. It's good to let people know what you've got out there, and you want them to respond to you a bit. But I don't get tips from Twitter about what's going on at the Supreme Court.
That's because the justices know who you are, and they tell you things.
But the justices, I don't think, tweet either.
Sure they don't. I'm
not sure they would know how to tweet, even if they wanted to tweet. Well, they'd ask if I was a birdie, if I said if you tweeted.
I really want to ask you this, Nina. You covered the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas case over 20...
I broke the story.
You broke the story. That's almost...
I broke the story.
28 years ago.
On several occasions, Thomas told me graphically of his own sexual prowess. Because I was extremely uncomfortable talking about sex with him at all, and particularly in such a graphic way, I told him that I did not want to talk about these subjects.
I mean, unbelievable. And then I'm thinking, okay, so Nina did that. Now we are, we're working right now with Anita Hill on Industry Commission and
on sexual harassment.
On sexual harassment.
Prevention.
And I find her to be riveting. But, we are in an interesting time. And I wanted to ask you, when everything was coming up in the Supreme Court, with Kavanaugh, and a lot of memories coming back through this last year with the Me Too Time's Up situation. Do you feel that there is a big difference between 28 years ago versus now? And what were your feelings when you saw what was coming out publicly? What did that bring up for you?
Well, there was a sort of sense of deja vu, although there were very clear differences. Anita Hill was a lone young woman with not a lot of support. She had some folks from Harvard and Georgetown who were helping her, and it was an all-male judiciary committee. This time, the nominee had an enormous amount of support, and to some extent, so did his accuser. The similarities were obviously there. The Republicans were all men, but there were women on the committee, very smart, trained lawyer women on that committee, and they used their presence to make the points that they wanted to make. It wasn't quite the one-way street that it was in terms of outright abuse of Anita Hill. That didn't happen to Christine Blasey Ford, because she had very good legal help, but mainly because she had allies on the committee, clear allies on the committee. And that was not the case 28 years earlier. I would have to say that in the Kavanaugh case, for me anyway, the most amazing difference was the political nature of his personal defense, accusing the Democrats of carrying out a Clinton vendetta. And that was something that he's even tried somewhat to step back from, saying he said some things he regrets. It's going to take a while for people to forget that, because it was a very unjudge-like thing to be saying.
And was covering the hearing different? And did it feel different covering the Kavanaugh hearings than it did covering the Anita Hill's hearing? Or was for lack of a better term, the art of broadcasting, was that basically the same in both eras?
Not for me, because in the Thomas Hill hearing, those hearings were held in the Senate caucus room, which is this beautiful old room where many historic hearings have taken place. And I was there sitting at the table with my little microphone, doing the live coverage, doing pieces for All Things Considered, doing everything. There were times during the hearing that they would take a break and I just had to fill. And I would be waving at senators as if to say, please come over here and save me. Come talk to me. I can't talk for 25 minutes all by myself. But this time, the hearings, as they have been more recently, were held in the Hart Senate Office Building, which is a new building, rather sterile. But it does have broadcast booths that ring the room from the second floor. So you're looking down on the nominees and the committee. And in some ways you can see more, and in some ways you can't see much of anything. You're looking at your little TV monitor to see close up what's going on.
And Eric, I don't know if you...
I'm just listening to her stories, and Nina, I've been a huge fan of yours for decades too, and it's wonderful to hear what your perspective is on as I've listened to you on the radio for so long, to hear from your own point of view what it was like to cover these stories. Really remarkable. I'm just kind of mesmerized by what you're saying. But go on.
From a local news perspective, covering the Kavanaugh hearings, I mean, what is it like? And I think what I'm interested here is in the receipt of news in such a politicized environment, and the ability to put forth something that is going to be persuasive and actually informative when people are already sitting so
their
so much
seats
on the
of it.
sides. Yeah.
Well, we know that people are more polarized. We know that people on the right and left filter out very often what they don't want to know. And they just ignore it. They don't believe it, which is very different from when it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, when public opinion turned about Watergate, when public opinion turned about the Vietnam War, based on reporting that people over time did come to accept. The vast majority of people agreed on certain facts. Now we have a president who calls either all of the press or a substantial part of the press the enemies of the people from time to time. Now, I don't deny that there are reporters who step over the line, perhaps, and irritate the president more than he likes, although that's not new. That's always happened. And we forget where that phrase, enemies of the people, comes from. It comes from Stalin. That he was the coiner of that phrase, that the press were the enemies of the people.
I just totally agree with what she's saying in that, you know, I think what she's talking about, what Nina's talking about, is a time years ago when people actually watched or consumed news because they were interested in learning, for example, more about the story, or both sides of the story, or all sides of the story. And I think that's not the case for many consumers these days. They've made up their minds about what's happening. It's kind of like rooting for a sports team. They want to hear their team win, and they want to see their team win in the media, and they want to see the team that they oppose lose. So they want you to be the cheerleader for their team. And that's sort of the end result of the polarized nature of our
I can't help but wonder, I just want to say, one of the reasons when I'm listening to this, though, I think this actually goes back to social media. It used to be, when you talk traditionally, there were 3 major networks, and news was at a certain time across all the networks, and that was the information hub other than the newspaper or magazines. And so now we have so many sources that might not even be fully fleshed out or accurate, but we're getting it from so many different places. People aren't taking the time. Appointment television is different. You have a president who likes social media and does the tweeting, and people take that as the news and information. So I can't help but wonder if we're kind of setting up that dynamic as well in our technology growth.
Setting it up, or just responding to it, or coping with it, or it's a situation that we're all reacting to.
After, you know, it's an interesting proposition, because the news media is not Facebook. Mm-hmm. It's not Twitter. There isn't a news organization that owns these technologies. If we were talking about any other area that was essential to the way people live their lives, we would be viewing these as utilities that are in some manner regulated. But because people express themselves on Twitter, on Facebook, etc., it implicates the First Amendment guarantee of a free speech, a free press, and it becomes much more complicated.
Do either of you feel like the First Amendment and the right to a free press is actually under attack, or is that hyperbole when people say that?
Well, no. When we brought up the discussion about the use of the term "enemies of the people," I mean, is that an attack on the free press, or is that an attack on journalists, as a group? I think, from my perspective, you worry as a reporter, okay, somebody hears that term "enemies of the people," and 99% of the people will hear that and won't think much of it, but there's a tiny percentage of people who might hear that as, okay, they're the enemy, I need to do something about the enemy, and that makes you worry about your personal safety from time to time.
There's so much more done on location than ever before. Right? We know that there's a lot of that happening. Enemy of the people, does that start to create a safety issue outside of the storytelling you're telling on the street? What is your experience right now?
Well, I haven't had anything violent happen to me, but I've heard anecdotes from people. There's a woman who works for one of the stations as a photographer, and she wrote a blog post recently that she's getting out of the business. And the reason why is because they kept getting kind of hostile responses. she'd show up at the scene of a story and people would respond with insults. She just got tired of it. She got tired of hearing that sort of thing. And occasionally people would threaten her.
And is that new? Nina, is that...
We talk about civility, but when the barriers start to break down, people used to write letters to me that were abusive, and I would write back if it wasn't too horrible. If it was really scary, I would send it up to our security people, and I would write back and say, this is the kind of language that I'm sure your mother would be embarrassed to have you use. And they would write back to me. This is when we actually had letters, and they would write back to me and say, it never occurred to me that anybody was going to read my letter. And there's some element to that, to social media, where people react really pretty viciously, as if nobody's on the other end. It just goes out into the ethers. And there's that, and then there's Trump, and there are other people like Trump over the course of history, but in Trump's case, he's the president of the United States, and before that, he was a candidate for president, and it has gotten to the point where every network that I'm aware of has security people who go with reporters at Trump rallies. They are not safe places anymore, if they ever were, but they're definitely not now. And that is not a good thing in a free and open society, to require that kind of security. It's what we fear when we talk about how our lives changed because of 9/11 and other terrorist attacks. It's what makes me wonder sometimes when I see how much security we actually have at NPR, how we reinforce it when there's an attack against a reporter, as there was in Maryland.
Sources are telling CNN that there have been multiple injuries and fatalities. A shooting in Annapolis, Maryland, that's the capital of Maryland, about an hour outside of Washington, D.C. The shooting was at the newspaper there, the Capital Gazette.
There's really no way to protect us 100%, I feel. I mean, people see where we are. They can tell, and we stay in the same place a lot all morning long. That's a scary situation. And even before the attack on that newsroom in Maryland, there was another situation where there was a TV news crew. They were gunned down and killed. It was a reporter and photographer. I think it was somewhere in the southeast, I believe. Somebody knew they were there, and he was a person who had worked at the TV station before, and he had some kind of grudge. So it was a workplace violence type of thing. But it was easy to find the reporter and the crew because they were already on once.
Well, that's one of the things. What I want to say about that is we actually have, it was, again, at the Broadcast Steering Committee, one of the reporters, female reporters, was talking about social media. And what happens is because she's required to do social media and she's, here we are today or whatever, she said that is a way that people find her. And there's been actually some aggression towards her,
right?
Being a reporter.
We've definitely had kind of stalker types who, for some reason or other, glom onto a particular reporter, usually the female reporters, and they've had to have their own security follow them or go with them on the scene of stories because somebody is paying too much attention in kind of a scary way.
And that's scary regardless. And now you have, again, this kind of, I want to say it's a telephone line through your social media where people can see immediately, even before you're there, they're there.
Obviously what happened in Maryland, sent chills down the spine of anyone who works in news because of the nature of that situation, that attack on a newsroom. Somebody just came right in. And, that was a newsroom, that one in Maryland, didn't have a lot of security, didn't have guards at the front door. I mean, apparently it was a small town newspaper. You could just walk right in, and people did. Whoever was responsible for that took advantage of that. And I don't think there are many newsrooms like that in the U.S. anymore.
Well, the security that goes on, and you're saying, Nina, even for you seeing that security in NPR, does it change the way you give news, that you report news?
I don't think it changes it, what the security is like at NPR. I don't think that changes the way we report news. I think it undoubtedly has some sort of an effect when you have to have a security escort at a political rally, which is true now at the Trump rallies. And in some measure, in some ways, the president uses the media, feeds off of them as the so-called enemies of the people at these rallies, which is why they're so fraught.
I have a question about the permanence of what we are experiencing right now. We were just talking about using Skid Row as an example of a place where you have to go out and report, and there is real danger all around, and that's expanding because of the expanding nature of that population here in Los Angeles. But more broadly, when you have a president willing to use the bully pulpit to make a statement, and that then goes down into these silos on cable news where they're doing the sports competition, Eric, that you referred to earlier, and it's also reinforced in social media. And with the things like looser gun laws and more guns out there and more people feeling like they have the right to express themselves in whatever way that they want, how concerned are you both about this period of time where people are seeing broadcast journalists as pushing fake news or doing damage to their political viewpoints as something that will go beyond Trump, beyond this administration, beyond this current period, and actually seep into the permanent ecosystem of the country?
The fabric even of the way news is reported. Mm-hmm.
Or do you think it's temporary?
Well, I hope it doesn't end up being permanent, because there is a relationship, I believe, between rhetoric and actions that people might take. And the rhetoric is overheated. There's a tiny percentage of people who will listen to that sort of thing, and they might do something. And I just hope it changes. I mean, I hope it calms down. I think, our safety sometimes depends on that. And it is magnified by what's going on in social media. People are behind a keyboard. They think they're anonymous. They don't understand that by saying the things that they're saying, they're contributing to this situation, which could be dangerous.
Well, the thing that's sort of interesting about the period we live in, and certainly there are ebbs and flows of hatred and bigotry in the history of this country. And what I guess is most disturbing about the times we currently live in is that I think to a significant extent, most people thought we had gotten beyond that kind of overt hostility. It's not that people didn't still think thoughts that are ugly. They understood that it was not okay to say those things. And now the lid is sort of ripped off, at least partially. And I suppose there are those who think it's just that we should see the ugliness and deal with it. But I think it feeds on itself, and it gets worse over time if you don't clamp down on it to some extent. Words matter, and ideas matter. And when a whole class of kids graduating from, I don't know if it was high school or college, give the Hitler salute and think that's funny, it's not funny.
Right. And do you see us as right now clamping down on what's happening? Do you see any significant voice or any significant group right now that is doing exactly what you are saying needs to be done, clamping down on it?
No. I mean, we have the usual suspects. We have the ACLU and various groups like that are going to court, castigating the president and some of his allies. But I think the really unfortunate thing is that people in positions of power who know better either are not free or feel they are not free to say anything. And that old saying, first they came from my friend, my neighbor, and nobody said anything. And then they came from my neighbor and nobody said anything. And then they came from me and there was nobody left to say anything. And that is what I worry about.
Yeah, I've heard different variations of that. I want to jump, if I can, to corporations and back to the idea of free speech. And I'll use an example, one that we were, as a union, very involved in. And Eric, I think you have been involved with Sinclair Broadcast Group early on. I don't know if you were involved in this latest incident, but that's right. But this recent incident where a number of local journalists around the country had a particular message that was pushed out.
Scripted. It was
scripted and
right.
then pushed out.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
And there was a lot of debate around that. I mean, I guess my own sense from the broadcast community, the journalists who I spoke with, there was not a uniform response to that, as might be anticipated, where every journalist was upset, etc. People really had some strong feelings about it. I guess my question to you, I'll start with you, Eric, is did that feel like something that was new, like a corner had been turned, or did it feel like more of the same because it happens within large behemoth corporations that own news stations across the country all the time? Or how significant was that moment in your mind?
Well, I think that when people saw news anchors across the country reading the same scripted statement, the way that was edited together by somebody and put out on social media, I mean, it was shocking, and it made our profession
devastating.
Yeah, it made our profession look bad, and it was. It may have also had an impact on the ability of that company to get the merger that they wanted. It may have had a political impact that boomeranged on them and wasn't a good thing from their perspective. It was shocking to those of us in the profession to see people doing that, and to know that in many cases they were, at each one of those stations they were told, look, somebody's got to do this. And I have not worked for Sinclair, and I don't know what it would have been like to work for them. But I don't think that local television news should be used as a political megaphone. We have a pretty good reputation. Polls have shown local TV news, people think that we're an honest broker. We don't fall into the same category of being partisan that people have, or the notion that certain other media outlets are partisan. They don't think that way about local TV news. So if we have a really good reputation for trying to be unbiased and neutral, and why take sides and ruin that or alienate a segment of the population? It doesn't make good business sense to me why you would ever do that. Plus, not to mention the fact that it doesn't make journalism sense to me either.
Well, in local news, that's you're part of the family, right? Every day people turn you on and they feel that you're in their homes.
Yes.
And they're relaying the stories in our communities. So that's
a really important level of trust. And if we have that, why would we squander that?
Right.
Well, I guess let me push on that a little bit, because I had heard that, in fact, it's not uncommon for both Sinclair and for other news station owning corporations to have messages and to ask journalists to push out those messages, and it goes out to everyone. And it was, in fact, the putting it together and maybe the content of that particular message that was so shocking. But a number of journalists who really
outside of Sinclair,
well, and within Sinclair, defensively saying, this happens and it has not actually attacked the integrity of my ability to convey the news and to be an honest broker, et cetera. And that took me by surprise.
I just don't
when
believe
I heard
that.
So
why don't you believe
I just don't believe that. I don't think that you can be reading something that is a political message that normally in a newspaper would belong on the editorial page, and on a television station it can be clearly labeled as opinion by the people who own the network or the station and put out there. And then you put that in the mouth of somebody else and you don't tell them what it is, that you're being forced to say this, that doesn't have an effect on your viewership, listenership, the consumers of news, and it doesn't have an effect on your reputation.
Absolutely.
I would never do that.
Absolutely. I mean, to the extent that the audience believes that you've taken sides in this very contentious partisan debate, then you start getting people who are saying, well,
they're using our, if they do that, if the owner of the network or the station does that, says to me, if you want to work here, you have to say this and read it like you believe it, They're using my reputation to foist a political view that is not necessarily mine. I would never do that. That's fraud. That's defrauding the public of our good offices.
But are they also giving permission? I always think of broadcasters, reporters being people who are nonpartisan, even though they're, clearly as human beings they are. So, but news to be very non-biased, right? And I guess that when I'm seeing that, I feel like that gives permission, or the feeling of permission, that now you're going to share your political beliefs, even if that wasn't a person's political belief who maybe said that statement. But it kind of opens the door to an expression of political beliefs from reporters and broadcasting from news that it just never was tolerated before.
And does content matter there? Is it any message that is being pushed out, or is it just partisan messaging?
Well, I got into this profession because I wanted to do journalism, and I wanted to do a fair job. I wanted to be unbiased, and I wanted to cover the stories that matter. I don't want to be part of something that is promoting a political message at all. I think that's the end. I don't want to. I don't understand. Again, I don't understand from a business standpoint why you'd want to do that, and it's the opposite of why I do this.
All right. Well, it sounds like whoever I was talking to was wrong.
Do you understand the business aspect?
I do, because unlike when you and I were growing up in journalism, the ethic was that you were not to have a viewpoint. It still is that is still my ethic and
mine too.
Ethic. That we all have personal opinions, but as much as we humanly can, we're not supposed to convey those on the air. However, some entities have made money by having a distinct viewpoint, starting with Fox, MSNBC, and other big and small operators, and Sinclair is one of them. And there is a Sinclair-owned station in Washington, D.C., and the part that sort of I choke on is that the people who are watching it have no particular idea that some of the material that is being put out by that station is the network owner's viewpoint packaged as something else.
Don't you want to, as a reporter, report on that? I feel like there's also a lot of things that are going on within the news that I'd love to see more. And I think there is a little bit more, like we saw just with, now Acosta having his, credentials taken and then brought back. There was more vocalness from different networks and stations and, news stations. But I would love to hear a cohesive, support around from all the different broadcaster and reporters in all the different stations. If there's something you feel that's going on, to hear you in a unified voice, be able to say that. Is that something?
There isn't going to be one.
Yeah.
There isn't going to be one, because we're a very uppity group of people and we very rarely agree about everything, anything. But the Acosta situation, you would have to be an idiot if you couldn't figure out, for example, let's say you're Fox or Sinclair or a conservative Trump supporter. You don't have to think that far ahead to know that someday there will be a Democratic president who could lift your press credentials, your star reporter's credentials. You don't have to be a genius to figure that out. And so from both a First Amendment, free speech, free press, and even a commercial viewpoint, they had to support CNN and Acosta. It made no sense not to support him and them.
And I think it made a difference.
Well, I do, yeah. Well, before we leave Sinclair, I do want to make sure that we're properly fixing the position of the journalists who work for Sinclair, because I think there was an extreme outcry, but there was also an acknowledgement that there is some element of that goes on, and I don't believe that the journalists who work for Sinclair felt like pawns in the extreme way that they were presented. And I guess that was the larger
Some of them did.
point.
Right,
some of them did,
and some
but,
did not, right.
but some did not, right. So, but I have a broader question, which is this idea of non-partisan viewpoint, of a neutral viewpoint. I mean, how does that actually work if you believe relatively consistently that a particular party or a party line is just wrong? One complaint that we have, that I have as a consumer, is the apparent need for news outlets to always give both sides of an issue, even when they know that one side is just flat wrong, because that's the only way that in that instance they are able to convey a sense of neutrality. Let me ask the two of you, in taking what you have described, Nina, as when you were growing into the profession as sort of something that's sacred, it sounds like, the neutrality of your viewpoint, the nonpartisan nature of the viewpoint that you're going to convey as a journalist. How do you actually accomplish that when you really believe that one side is wrong?
Well, I still think you have to be fair. There's a difference between being unbiased and fair. And frankly, stories that have a variety of viewpoints, and when those viewpoints clash, are far more interesting than the ones that are all one way. On the other hand, there is you could not fairly say, for example, Mr. Hitler asserts that Jews are responsible for the falling economy in Germany today. That's obviously wrong, but in most cases, there are ways to show that the facts claimed by one side or the other are in error. So, and we see that increasingly with Trump and some other folks, where you see so-and-so claimed without evidence, or he falsely claimed, or contrary to what top aides say, Senator so-and-so said he never did X. I mean, it's a lot blunter than it used to be. We used to be a little bit of patsies for people who said, well, I'm saying it, so you report it. I think that the good news and the bad news is that now we have to call them on it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You feel the same way?
Well, I and there's a debate in journalism about what some people call both sides-ism, which is this notion that you have to have a kind of binary notion of, well, first I'm going to give side A and then I'm going to give side B. And I agree with Nina that the goal is to be fair when you present your story. And oftentimes I get comments on my stories where people call up and we've given some summary of some national story, and the comment is, well, you're just not very positive about the president in that you weren't very positive. And my response is, was the story accurate and was it fair? Was there an attempt to give you what both sides are saying? And the answer is no. There's no problem with the facts in your story. There's no problem with it. It's very, very difficult now to navigate this. It's made it much more harder now.
Are people more positioned? Like you spoke about this a little earlier, people are so already come in with a point of view, no matter what the news is. So when you talk about being fair, telling both sides of it, if you can go and show, for instance...
Telling both sides, you have to tell both sides. Maybe you're going to give one side more time than the other side. It's not going to be exact. And this is such a subjective thing, too. To decide or convey what's fair. It's difficult.
Well, when Nina was just saying, you were talking about, giving facts. And you're right, you can have it weighed. But let's say right now we see in this presidency, right, certain facts that are changed constantly. We can see it on real time. We can replay it. And yet, in some ways, it feels that there's an indifference from the audience. I don't care. I don't care the fact that, you're showing me all these facts. I see that he's doing,
I like him. He's doing a great job
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, period.
It's funny that sometimes you hear the phrase fact-based reporting, or we specialize in fact-based reporting. Well, isn't all reporting supposed to be fact-based? But in this environment that we find ourselves in, facts are fungible. Facts may not matter. And that's really frustrating.
Right.
There are alternative facts. Or, no, it wasn't a doctored video. It was sped up.
Right.
It's frustrating.
It is.
It has to be. And I can't help but wonder, when David asked earlier, is it changing news in the future of how it's going to be?
Permanent?
Yeah, is it permanent? What's happening? I wonder if this has been a lesson and it's creating a new norm, right? Is that new norm just for now, or is that new norm something that we're going to see exponentially grow and expand? And
It's interesting. I have a 9-year-old, and I spend time training my 9-year-old to understand and to filter the information and the news that she receives. But there's no question that dad's bias seeps in, whatever bias, whether it's known bias or not.
I hope you're teaching her about trusted news sources as opposed to things
I absolutely am.
Okay.
I absolutely am. I'm just not sure if my neighbor across the street in training his 9-year-old is training in the same way. And so in terms of the permanent nature, my daughter's going to be a different receptacle for news than the one across the street. And maybe this is just nostalgia. I don't feel that was the case when I was growing up and my father sat me down and taught me how to read a newspaper and the significance of that. I kind of think it was very similar to what my friends were receiving if they were lucky enough to have parents to do the same thing. So
it has changed.
Can I go back to something you were saying when you're on location? One of the things that we know has been in our industry, and I know this again because I sit in with the broadcasters and reporters as they're sharing in the BSC, but is the MMJs. Can you tell us a little what an MMJ is and, multimedia journalist?
A multimedia journalist is what you might call a one-man band or one-woman band where you go out with your camera on your shoulder and you are expected to report, shoot, and edit the story yourself. And it's a challenge because you're basically doing 3 jobs yourself. It's a challenge to do it under deadline pressure. It's hard. And then there is a safety element as well, I think, that people have been concerned about, where you're all by yourself and you're really kind of vulnerable in a lot of ways. But people do it. They manage. We have people who do it, and they're not able to do as much work. And they're not able to do it as well, I don't think.
Well, that whole idea that somebody coming up behind you and you can't see them, and now you're trying to manage the camera and all the different elements. Is MMJ, the people who do MMJ work, is it on all different kinds of broadcasting that takes place? You mean different kind of reporting, whether it's the situational, I'm trying to say. So is it something that's just left to maybe reporting for certain incidences that are not high risk?
We have people who work in an outlying bureau, one of whom is an MMJ. Different TV stations use them in different ways.
I only view this through a negative lens, through the overburdensome nature of broadcast work as it's evolved in these companies that are attempting to continue to push responsibilities without paying for those responsibilities on individuals. Is there any positive aspect to an MMJ type reporting?
If the technology changes, I can't imagine how much more it can change. It's already instant. It's so easy to photograph things and get video of things and to transmit them. So yeah, now it has changed a lot, but ultimately you're doing different jobs. I think that's the biggest challenge. And there's the safety aspect, but there's also, while you're shooting, you're not thinking about anything else, and so you have to keep the technical aspect of shooting in mind, and then you think about, well, maybe I should look at this angle while you're doing that. You can't make a phone call at the same time that you're doing that. So they are different jobs. Reporter, photographer, editor, those are different jobs. And while you're doing one, you really can't multitask well on the other task. I think that's the biggest problem.
In every news organization, whether it's a broadcast organization or not, reporters and editors are being asked to do zillions more things and to satisfy many more platforms. If you're in radio, as I am, you do radio, you do digital, you do social media, you can do TV as well. It helps the network. I like doing it. It improves my access, so I add that to my toolkit. But there is a limit to how much one human being can do well.
Right.
You can do it, but you may not do it well all the time.
Do you think that people who are just coming into the industry, the one thing is that we're hearing is young people are the do-it-all, right? Like they're being raised with technology in a way we just didn't have that exposure until later, right? So we don't have, it's not like a third arm for us necessarily. And I hear from young people, they like the idea of being able to do all that. How do you help them see that there's a benefit to really focus on the specialty of what you're doing rather than trying to be a jack of all trades and master of none?
Well, I think that a lot of kids are drawn to journalism because it's an interesting profession. They want to write. They want to take pictures. They want to be a star, whatever rings their chimes. But in fact, ultimately, they have to realize that the pay is not great in most circumstances. And the vast majority of them leave the profession by the time they're 40 or younger. I feel like this podcast is not exactly an upper, I've been doing this work for many, many, many decades, and I still love it, and I still have the thrill of the chase, and I still love a good scoop, and I think it's a wonderful job. But I was lucky enough to get into it in the golden age of broadcast journalism, which doesn't really exist anymore, and that is the sad part. What was your
first big story? What was that story that was like, this is why I'm here. This is exactly, what was that story? Do you remember it?
Oh, yeah, I think I do.
Oh, good.
So I was working for the Peabody Times in Peabody, Massachusetts. This is not a broadcast story. Mm-hmm. And I had many beats, including the police beat. And I got a tip that the bank had been robbed. So I called up the bank and I said, "Hi, this is Nina Totenberg over at the Times. I'm wondering, I understand that you've been robbed." And this voice said, "Yeah." And I said, "So who is this?" And he said, "This is the robber."
And did you say, "Can I interview you?"
It was a great story. They were the most hapless group of robbers. They left a trail of cash behind them as they fled. Their car broke down. It was a wonderful story.
That is really a great story. So that's the one that really stands out for you as the beginning. I love that. And what is it?
I mean, that's one of the. I had a wonderful time as a young reporter. I got sent to Northern Ireland to cover the Troubles, and I would be filing away on the telex machine, and I would write, bomb scare, gotta go.
I love what you're saying, telex machine, right?
Right.
There you go. That's, wow.
Yeah.
Fabulous. I mean, you've traveled the world doing what you do.
No, I wouldn't go that far, but in that case, I got sent out of the country.
Okay.
They sent me with a gas mask, which didn't work on the gas they were using. It was, when you're young and doing something like that, you have no idea you're in serious danger. I would hide behind cars when people were shooting, and it never occurred to me that I actually could get hurt, could get shot. I thought I would always escape, like in the movies, and I did. I was very lucky, but that's why in that kind of coverage is more often than not for young people because they're fearless.
Right. Or stupid.
I was going to say,
you sent me to do that today, I'd be scared. I'd be scared out of my wits, number one. Right. And number two, I couldn't run fast enough.
Eric, that's so funny. Eric, what is...
you have a story to top the robbers?
Yeah.
I don't, actually. That's a great story. I mean, like Nina, I mean, yeah, of course you're in this for the scoop and the story that you get where you've got it and nobody else has it and they're not going to be able to get it for a while. Those are the stories that you remember. And, once I had a scoop that came from an anonymous person, turned out to be the sheriff of the area I was working, and he told me, "Look, we're about to arrest a judge for buying cocaine and making deals with some of the people who sold him cocaine who appeared in his courtroom." And I reported that story.
Oh, what a great story.
It was a great story. And then the next day, he denied it, and he said, "Listen, that Eric Spillman who reported this story, as when I get done with his TV station and suing them for libel, I'm going to end up owning that TV station." And
did he?
No. A few weeks later, the sheriff called me and said, "Look, we're going to be arresting the judge at such and such location. Your camera will be there. Have your camera there, and you can see it. You can see him when he's taken away in handcuffs." And he was.
So did you feel retribution in that moment?
I felt like I was happy to have had the scoop.
Right.
It was a great thing.
Yeah. Vindication. Not retribution. Vindication.
That's right. Vindication.
There is that moment. There is that moment when you break a story and you're waiting for somebody else to get it. And after a few days, you're praying that somebody else will be able to match it because you're all out there by yourself on a limb.
Right, you're vulnerable.
Hanging there, waiting. You're very vulnerable.
even saying something like that, do you ever try to help somebody else get the story so that you can have that kind of...
No.
You see, not that afraid. Not that afraid.
You don't help other people.
No, you want somebody to get it. You don't want them to get it from the same sources you had.
Right.
You want them to get it from their sources.
To back up your original story.
So basically...
To back up your original story.
So do those sources come to you the more you're known publicly? Is that where you're getting those sources? How do you start
they make it
off?
easier. The more famous you are, the more well-known.
How do you get those sources when you're not?
Always. Sometimes it pays to be not known because you can dig around and people don't notice you. They don't take you seriously. So you're ferreting around trying to find stuff out and nobody's paying much attention. And it gives you a lot of time to do that. There were times when I would sit in on meetings where people didn't know I was a reporter. And I couldn't get away with that today. I would be recognized instantly. So it's not always true. It is true that people sometimes come to you because you're well known and respected, and they want you to do this story. They want attention for their story. But I think most of the time that real scoops are not pure leaks. They are the result of some hard work, and then the story finally plops in your lap at that point after you've been knocking around for a while.
You are an organizer, and you're a big proponent of NPR being union. And maybe you can talk about
I helped start the union at NPR.
That's an
Well, principally because I was making Linda Wertheimer and I and a couple of other people started the idea of a union when we weren't getting any raises, and we were mainly women, so we were terribly underpaid. This was in the 80s.
NPR was predominantly women, you're saying, or you're saying the women were the...
It was the people on the air, NPR was very small. Mm-hmm. The bargaining unit, our first bargaining unit was 16 people. And most of us were women because the reason they hired us, we were very good and we were very cheap because we were female. Even though the federal law said you couldn't discriminate based on
gender.
That just meant you hired people who would accept low wages, and that was women because women weren't getting a lot of jobs in those days. You were very happy to have the job. But at some point, we were not getting any significant raises, and we decided to unionize. And the first thing I did was, there was a very famous, at the time, labor lawyer by the name of Stephen Schlossberg, and he had a book called Organizing and Your Rights. And I plunked it on my desk so that everybody would see it. And I got called into the boss's office a couple of times to ask me what I was doing, and I would say, I'm organizing. It's my right to do that, and we'll see what happens. So then I asked a variety of different unions to make presentations to us because we were probably going to have to, and did have to have, a union election because they wouldn't recognize the union. And we eventually, as you know, affiliated with AFTRA, but I also had the Newspaper Guild come in and the UAW and the Teamsters. And I had the Teamsters come in, and we had those meetings with the Teamsters in the fishbowl in the middle of the news area where everybody could see us, and I did it absolutely on purpose because I wanted the bosses to think that we would affiliate with the Teamsters and that it would scare them. and the Teamsters were all these kind of thick-necked guys in suits who had no idea what NPR was, had no clue why they were there. Mm-hmm. and were looking at me like I had three eyes. I didn't care. And eventually we voted to affiliate with AFTRA. And then we had a year of negotiations, and they even had to send down the Secretary-Treasurer, Sandy Wolf, to negotiate because it was getting so
contentious.
We were just running up against a solid brick wall. And finally, the ins were out, and Frank Mankiewicz became the president of NPR and settled it all within a matter of, I think, 2 to 3 days. And I said I almost doubled my salary overnight.
Is that fabulous?
That's amazing.
First of all, so when you said, how many people were at NPR then? 14? So 16.
I don't know how many people were at NPR, but in the bargaining unit, that means reporters and I think newscasters, there were 16 people.
So let's just talk about how many, just real quick, so we could have the change to now. How many people are at NPR now?
How many are in the
bargaining unit?
I don't know, but I know it's probably more like a couple of hundred.
Yeah, right.
I love going to NPR. I go to visit when I'm in D.C. I think that the work that you're all doing is just phenomenal, and you're definitely not a small shop anymore.
And we really appreciate it.
No, we're definitely not a small shop anymore.
And
we have very wonderful shop stewards who really do the Lord's work.
Yeah.
And it's not a place where I actually think management is, for the most part, venal, but it's the nature of the beast. They're the bosses, and we're the boss. And we don't want to be the boss. And sometimes managers can do things that are extremely foolish, just as I can undoubtedly do things that are extremely foolish. And it's important to have an organizational structure so that you have a cooperative workplace that works.
Well, I think you've done a really good job. I know you finished negotiations this last year with NPR, and yet it was because of all of you standing forward, just like Eric coming in when they were doing negotiations with Tribune going into Sinclair. It takes participation. It takes, and you have.
It takes a village.
It does take a village.
Do you have any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, talking about the influence of the union at my workplace, it's important to have a seat at the table, and sometimes I have to explain to people I work with, why do we have to pay these dues? Why are we doing this? And I explain to them that if you have an opportunity to be able to sit there and to help formulate the rules that you're going to work by, why wouldn't you want that? And of course, we want to be able to have a voice, and this gives us a voice. And we were talking about that, the issue of journalistic integrity. This was an issue that was discussed in our most recent negotiation. We talked about it. We wanted to make sure that reporters, like those reporters you spoke about who worked for the other stations who were forced to read the same script, essentially. We wanted to make sure that, people wouldn't be required as part of their jobs to take a position, a political position, a biased position. And so during our contract negotiation, we negotiated a clause that basically says when there's an issue of journalistic integrity, it goes to a labor management committee for more discussion. And I think that's a valuable thing to have. I don't know how valuable. It hasn't been tested, but it's better than nothing.
Well, it's almost by its existence, you actually help to stop certain things from happening, right? Just by being able to put that in a negotiation. And I think when Nina says, no, but we don't like to be told what to do, when you participate, you do have a voice, and that's less being, even though you still work for somebody, you still are designing some of your future. And there's something to be said about that.
And when decision makers know that before something can be finalized, it has to go in front of a group, that absolutely shapes the decisions that they make and whether or not they want to put it in front of the group in the first place. So,
well, I think this was, you guys were great, and
it's a great conversation.
Really, really good conversation. I think we could do like 20 of these just with the work that you do, seriously. And just to say how much I appreciate what you do. I feel informed, and I feel connected and educated. I'm very grateful that.
And thank you for what you do as well, both of you.
Yes, she does all this volunteer. There's no pay. It's amazing. Flies all over the country and also does podcasts. So thanks very much for coming in and talking with us.
All right, thank you.
Really great. Thank you so much.
Great.